The chaos of Christmas. Anyone ever feel like Christmas is chaotic? Yes. That's what we're looking at this Sabbath, the chaos of Christmas. A little bit of chaos here with the technology. It's not. All right. One of my favorite things about Christmas is the music. Anyone else agree? I'm sure we all have our favorite Christmas songs, our favorite Christmas carols that we like to hear at this time of the year. There's just something special about listening to Christmas music. I don't know what your favorite song is, but my favorite song is I Want a Hippopotamus for Christmas. I'm just kidding. No. But really one of my favorite songs is the song sung by Andy Williams, or at least made popular by Andy Williams. It's The Most Wonderful Time of the Year. You've heard this song. I'm sure most of you could sing along with this song. I'm not going to sing, so there's nothing to sing along to. But if you remember some of the lyrics, it covers a lot of festive things in this song, right? The most wonderful time of the year includes kids jingle belling, people shouting holiday greetings, visiting with friends, hosting holiday parties, Christmas caroling out in the snow, ghost stories. That's kind of unusual, right? Apparently this was an old Victorian custom of telling, kind of scary stories at Christmas time. You get a little flavor of that with the Charles Dickens Christmas Carol, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. Anyways, it's grown out of fashion. We don't really tell ghost stories at Christmas, but in the song they do. Mistletoeing and spending time with loved ones. I mean, that sounds really festive, right? Maybe aside from the ghost stories, but it sounds, a real good summation of what Christmas is about, doesn't it? But if you think about it, it sounds a little chaotic though too, right? I mean, there's just a ton of stuff going on. There's kids making noise with jingle bells. There's people shouting stuff at you. There's parties that you need to go to, not just go to, there's parties that you need to plan. I mean, that's pretty stressful and chaotic in itself. I mean, we're having a Christmas party here at the church next Saturday night. I know this is what Wes was getting to a little earlier, but we're having a Christmas party next Saturday night at 6 o'clock, cookie exchange. I mean, that's going to be fun, but, as one of the main planners of it, it's a little chaotic and a little stressful trying to get that thing ready to go for next Saturday night, but that's going to happen. And planning parties, planning Christmas socials, it's chaotic. And then they have in the song more than that, not just the parties, but then you go out and you sing songs in the snow. I mean, you have to leave your own warm home to go out in the snow to sing, or the cold weather. In California, here in Trace, we don't get too much snow, but it might get rain. Definitely cold. And you have other stuff. Meetings and time to spend with family and just a lot of stuff, a lot of busyness, a lot of chaos that is part and parcel of Christmas. And that's not even talking about the chaos of the malls, right? Or the chaos of Christmas shopping. Man, I am so glad I live in an Amazon age, all right? Or just a click of a button and they bring the stuff to you. But every once in a while, it doesn't have what you want and you have to go and brave the stores. And man, it's crazy. It's a madhouse and it's very chaotic. And then in addition to the chaos of Christmas shopping, there's the chaos of Christmas traffic, right? I mean, it seems like everyone is out driving or trying to drive or trying to park where you're trying to park, just nonstop with the traffic. And there's also the chaos of making plans. I mean, you have to choose, how are you going to handle the chaos? What parties are you going to attend? What family are you going to visit? For Crystal and myself, it's kind of easy since our families live about 30 miles or less from each other down in Southern California. But I know there's families that are spread out across the nation, spread out across the world. How are you going to choose who to visit? And maybe if you're married, you feel that need to spend time with your spouse's family. And so are you going to visit their family? You're going to visit your family. Or maybe your parents are divorced or your spouse's parents are divorced. And so you're getting pulled in 3 or 4 different directions. How are you going to choose? Where are you going to visit? Where are you going to go? It's chaotic to try to make these Christmas plans. And then when you get to where you're going, to those holiday parties or to meeting with your family, that can be very chaotic in itself, right? Holiday dinners can kind of devolve into chaos every once in a while when that certain sensitive topic comes up, maybe the election or politics, or maybe those old wounds kind of come to the surface. Having those meals, having those encounters at the holiday season can lead to chaos. And there's a whole different kind of chaos as well. There's those of us that get lonely at the holiday season. There are those of us that would give anything to even be a part of a family that's in the midst of fighting and that family chaos. That loneliness, that depression that can come at the holiday times, that's its own form of chaos. Christmas, there's just something wonderful, but something chaotic about the holidays, about Christmas itself. Because Christmas reminds us that there are problems that we can't solve, that there are people that we can't control, and that there are expectations that we can't meet. And a lot of the times, we're actually part of the problem. We're a problem that someone else can't solve, right? We're the problem that our family can't control. We're the person that lowers expectations or doesn't meet the expectations. It's a give and take when it comes to Christmas. Christmas reminds us that everything's not all perfect. Life isn't as amazing as Christmas might seem on TV or in postcards, because there are these issues that Christmas reminds us of. But the good news is that Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year. It's the most wonderful time of the year, though, not because of what is happening, but because of what has happened. Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year, not because of the chaos that can be surrounding us at Christmas time. Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year because of what happened 2,000 years ago. John, the apostle, John the revelator, John understood how important and how amazing this Christmas story, or the whole story of Jesus was. John, that we looked at last week, he's the one that said that Jesus was the Word that came to earth as flesh. If you remember, we talked about the incarnation and how the incarnation is the glory of God. And this is what John wrote, that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and that was the glory. Jesus' birth in Bethlehem was the glory of God when he became God in human flesh. But John also says, as an old man, he's writing, and he tries to sum up God, not just as the Word, but he uses one word to sum up God. And I think most Christians know this word that John uses. He says, God is love. He says God can be summed up into one word, and that word is love. And this is really a remarkable thing for John to say, because John was kind of at the end of his life when he started to write all of the book, his gospel and the book of Revelation and his other letters, like 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. He was an older man, and he had lived a full life. And he was still able to say that God is love at the end of his life, which was pretty amazing because he had seen a lot of tragedy. He had experienced a lot of heartache. He had lost his loved ones, his friends, his family, and yet he could still say that God is love. John, he had witnessed Emperor Nero. He had experienced Emperor Nero, this emperor of the Roman Empire, who was the first, if you remember from our sermon series on Mark, he was the first emperor that really began to persecute Christians. And Nero, he ordered several atrocities to be enacted upon the Christian believers. And John was alive to witness this, that this first or second generation of Christians were being martyred, were being killed because of their belief, because of Nero's orders. And John, I can't help but think that he felt a little bit responsible because he was one of the ones that was spreading this message. He was one of the ones that was founding this church of Christ. He was one of the ones that was spreading the gospel and getting people to believe in the good news. But this good news was costing them their lives. And John witnessed this, and he knew that Nero was on a warpath with Christianity. But that wasn't the only horrific thing that John knew and had witnessed and possibly experienced. He knew and was aware of Nero ordering General Vespasian to put down the Jewish rebellion. And General Vespasian marched into Galilee and began to steamroll the Jews all the way down to Jerusalem. He began to kill the Jewish men and take the Jewish women and children and sell them into slavery. And then when he got to Jerusalem, he began to lay siege. He was called back to Rome, and where he eventually became emperor, but his son remained. And his son laid siege, a 7-month-long siege to Jerusalem. Some scholars believe that John was actually in Jerusalem at this time of the siege. And he was able to witness this firsthand. And whether that is the case or not, John knew what happened there. He knew that eventually the Romans broke through Jerusalem, and it led to the death of over 1 million Jews. And it led to between 100 and 300,000 other Jews being sold into slavery. Not just that, it was when the Romans got into Jerusalem, they destroyed the Jewish temple. They just completely leveled it. Here, John was witnessing the persecution of his new community of faith. Here, John was alive and witnessed and maybe even experienced this death and destruction of his previous community of faith, the religion that he had grown up in, the Jewish religion, and he had seen friends and family members and the Jewish temple, the crown jewel of the Jewish faith, of the Jewish religion being destroyed, and putting the whole religion basically on life support. And actually ancient Judaism never recovered from this destruction of the temple there in Jerusalem in 70 AD. John was seeing destruction after destruction, death after death. And it wasn't just some theoretical death or some reports of people dying from a distance. By this point in his life, he was well aware that his friends had been killed as well. His friend Peter, his friend Paul had been executed. In fact, he was the last remaining of the original 12 disciples left alive. All of his friends, all of his fellow disciples, all of his family by this point had died. And yet, in spite of all of that death, all of that destruction, all of that pain, John never lost his faith. He was able to maintain his faith in God. He was able to write things like God is love, in spite of the fact that everyone he knew, everyone he cared about, everyone he loved had died. That Christianity was being persecuted, that Judaism had almost been destroyed completely. He was still able to maintain his faith in God. Ellen White, is one of our inspired writers, the founder of our church, she writes this. She says, "Talk unbelief, and you will have unbelief. But talk faith, and you will have faith. According to the seed sown will be the harvest." And John lived this out. He could have easily began to talk unbelief. He could have let the darkness and the pain and the tragedy of life creep into him and to become and to damage his faith and to begin to give up his faith and to have unbelief take root. But he didn't. He continued to talk faith. He continued to have faith. He continued to live out his faith in spite of it all, in spite of that chaos. In fact, he writes towards the end of his gospel in John chapter 20, verse 30, John writes, "Jesus did many other miraculous signs that his followers saw, which are not written in this book." He's come to the end of his gospel, and he said, "Look, I've told you a lot of the miraculous things that I've seen. His followers saw Jesus perform miraculous signs. I saw him perform miraculous signs. In fact, there's many more things that I could have added to this book. I could have written more books. I don't know, 5, 10, 100 more books. He doesn't say, but there's things I could have told you in addition to the things that I've already written because of what I have seen. He continues in verse 31. He said, but these are written so that you can believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. Then by believing, you can have life through his name. He says, I'm writing these things to you so that you can believe like I believe. Even though I've gone through so much pain and tragedy in my life, I still believe. In fact, I believe so much, I want you to believe too. So I've written these things down so that you can believe like I believe. And when you believe, you can have life. He's not talking about regular, ordinary, physical life. I mean, everyone has that, right? Everyone that hears these words, we have life. So obviously that's not what John is talking about. What he's saying is that when you believe, you can have life, a different life, a spiritual life, an eternal life through the name of Jesus. If you know the story of Jesus, you know that at the end of his life, when he was hanging on a cross, most all of his disciples, most all of his followers had abandoned him. There was just a small group that were there at the cross with him on Golgotha. John, his disciple, was there, probably the only disciple that was brave enough to stay in the presence of Jesus. He was also there with his mother, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and a few other of his followers. And so as Jesus was there on the cross, he saw his mother and he realized he didn't have much longer left to live. And he knew that his mother was in need of someone to watch after her. To leave a woman alone in that day and age and that culture was dangerous for a woman. They would be in danger of poverty and of neglect. By this time, Joseph, her husband, had already passed away. And so Jesus, in the midst of his own crisis on the cross, he sees his mother, and he sees his mother in need. And he says this, as he looks over to the disciple, John. John chapter 19, verse 26, says, Jesus saw his mother. He also saw the follower he loved very much standing there. Now, John, if you have picked up on this through your own study, John, when he talks about himself in his gospel, he never says his own name. He refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. I'm sure Jesus loved the other 11 disciples as well, but John is kind of like a code word. He didn't want to talk about himself really, so he just said the disciple whom Jesus loved. And so this is John talking about himself. Jesus sees Mary, he sees John, and then he says to his mother, "Dear woman, here is your son." He says, "Mom, I'm about to go, but I'm not going to leave you without someone to care for you, to tend to your needs, to watch over you, to protect you, to help provide for you. So here, take John as your adopted son. And John, take Mary to be your adopted mother. Care for each other, support each other, because I can't be here to do it any longer." And John does. John takes Mary as his mother. Christian tradition says that as John moved and did his work founding the Christian church, helping to found the Christian church, he brought Mary along with her. And according to Christian tradition, they ended up settling in Ephesus towards the last years of their lives. In fact, Crystal and I had the opportunity last year to go to Ephesus. And as we saw that old town where Paul worked and where he preached to people and built up a Christian church, after we saw the specific town of Ephesus, we got in the bus and kind of on the outskirts of the old town of Ephesus, we went to see the house that is traditionally believed to be Mary's home. And here it is. This is what it looks like on the outside. You can't really take pictures on the inside, but on the inside, they've converted it to a chapel. There's a little altar up front and different Christian icons in there. And we walked through it. We got to see this final home of Mary, the mother of Jesus. And what's interesting, as you leave the home and you kind of walk down some steps and along the way to get back to the bus, there's this wall. It's called the prayer wall. And as people walk by it, they attach pieces of material, cloth. I saw a few pieces of plastic, but mainly cloth. They tie it on to the wall as they pray, and it's a symbol of their prayer. And so you walk by this wall of people that are praying here at this home that is traditionally believed to have been Mary's final home. And whether it really was historically or not, it was still a special experience for Crystal and me, for myself. I'll just speak for myself, to be there and to contemplate this home, this life of Mary, the mother of Jesus, who became the adopted mother of John the Apostle. And see, John, who became Mary's adopted son, John, of any of the gospel writers, of any of the apostles, of anyone else really on earth, to really know the story of the Nativity, it would have been him. Because he's the one that ended up spending those extra years with Mary. He was the one that helped Mary, that provided for Mary, that was Mary's adopted son. And anyone knew the details of that first Christmas story, it would have been John. I mean, who else could have had that access to Mary to ask her, so what was it like to have that angel appear to you and announce the coming of the Savior? What was it like to carry the Savior of the world in your womb? What was it like to walk or to get to Bethlehem when you were so close to giving birth? What was it like to be rejected from the inns and to have to go to a stable? What was it like to experience the birth of Jesus? If anyone knew the answers, it would have been John. I'm sure Mary wouldn't have hesitated to tell the story of the birth of Jesus to John. And yet, when John goes to write his gospel, when John goes to write about the life and the teachings of Jesus Christ, he doesn't begin with the details of the Christmas story. This is how he begins his gospel. So the passage we looked at last week, John chapter 1, verses 1 to 3, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made." See, John doesn't get into the story of the taxes and the donkeys or the stables or the manger or any of that Christmas story. He doesn't do it. He doesn't give these details. He doesn't give the how of Christmas. Instead, he begins his gospel by giving the why. He says, okay, I know these details. I've heard them probably 100 times, but I want to tell you the why of why Jesus came to this world. Why this Word became flesh. He continues in verse 4, and he says, "In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind." He says, in Jesus, in this Word that became flesh, was life. And that life was a light to everyone. It wasn't a light just to the Jews. It wasn't a light just to a certain select group of people or a certain gender or a certain ethnicity. It was a light to everyone. But notice the tense here. The tense here is past tense, right? It says, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. But look what he says in verse 5. He changes it from past tense to present tense. And he says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. He says, Jesus, his light, it shines. It didn't shine, it didn't shone, it shines now. It's present tense. Jesus, when he came to this earth as a baby, he brought the light of heaven with him, and he pierced the darkness with this light. And this light, it has not gone out. The darkness has not overcome it. This light has shined since he came. It shines now, and it will shine into the future. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And this is how John writes about the Christmas story. John, who has experienced the darkness of this world. John, who has experienced the pain and the hurt and the heartache of this world. He says that even in the midst of all of the darkness that surrounds me and my life, in that darkness, the light still shines. And the darkness has not overcome it. The darkness of pain and death is enveloping this whole world, but yet Christ came with a light of life for everyone. No matter how hard the world has tried to extinguish that light, no matter how hard Herod tried, which is what we'll look at next week, no matter how hard the Romans tried, no matter how hard the other leaders of Israel tried, no matter how hard our culture tries, no matter how hard Satan tries, no matter how hard death itself tries to put out that light, it has not been put out. That light still shines in the darkness. So even though Christmas reminds us of the chaos, even though Christmas can remind us of the bad things of life, that the fact that there are problems that we can't solve, that Christmas reminds us that there are people that we can't control, that Christmas reminds us that there are expectations that we can't resist, that we can't meet. Christmas also reminds us of the good news that there is a light that shines and is not defeated by the dark. And that is why Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year. Not because of what is happening, but because of what has happened. Not because of the chaos that surrounds us, surrounds the holidays, but because of what has happened 2,000 years ago in Bethlehem. And that is why we have hope, because of what has happened. That is why we have peace in the midst of chaos. That is why we have the ability to get up every morning and face the day and take the next step, no matter how difficult it might be, because we have the hope of Jesus, who is the light of heaven, who is the light of life that is shining in the darkness. And we can face the darkness because of that light. No matter how chaotic life might be, we have that hope and that peace. John says the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Not then, not now, not ever. So this Christmas, as chaos threatens to overcome us through busyness, through consumerism, through pain, through loneliness, we can still not give up hope. We still do not have to be overcome by that chaos because we have this light. So no matter how chaotic this Christmas might be, no matter what kind of chaos this season might pile upon you, just take a deep breath and focus on the light.